My 30th birthday began with a lemon cake and a diamond ring, but it ended with a Polaroid that proved my husband was leading a double life in an organized scheme. I realized too late that he hadn't come home to ask for a divorce. He had come home to ensure I would be silenced forever. The cake was still sitting on the kitchen island, a delicate lemon sponge with 30 candles waiting to be lit, when the front door slammed open with a violence that shook the pictures on the hallway walls. I turned around, a smile already forming on my face, ready to joke about him forgetting the matches again. But the smile died the moment I saw Mark. He wasn't carrying a gift. He wasn't wearing his usual exhausted, end-of-the-day slumped shoulders. He looked sharp, cold, and entirely like a stranger. He didn't even glance at the cake. He walked straight to the table, reached into his leather briefcase, and tossed a thick, heavy envelope onto the white countertop. It slid across the marble, stopping right next to the candles. "Happy birthday, Sarah," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Consider these the final gift. I'm done." I stared at the envelope, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It took me a second to process the legal weight of the document, the formal font, the cold terminology of separation. My hands trembled as I reached for the flap, my mind racing through the last 10 years of our marriage. Had I missed a sign? Was it the late nights at the office? The sudden distance? The way he stopped asking about my day? I pulled the papers out, the words blurring, but the reality hit me like a physical blow. Irreconcilable differences. A laugh bubbled up in my throat, a hysterical, broken sound. We were a power couple in the city, the envy of our friends, a storybook romance that had survived everything from corporate layoffs to my mother's illness. And now, on the milestone of my 30th birthday, he was ending it with a flick of his wrist. "Is this a joke?" I whispered, my voice cracking. "Mark, look at the candles. Look at the life we built. You can't just walk in here and—" "I'm not walking," he interrupted, his gaze icy. "I'm moving. Most of my things are already packed in the car. I found a place, and before you ask, no, there's no point in counseling. There's someone else, Sarah, and she's pregnant." The room seemed to tilt. The scent of lemon zest and vanilla suddenly felt suffocating, like a tomb. I looked at him, searching for the man I married, the man who had promised to stand by me through every trial, and found nothing but a hollow shell. He wasn't even angry. He was clinical, as if he were discussing a business merger he had already decided to liquidate. "Pregnant?" I echoed, the word feeling foreign in my mouth. "Her name is Elena. She's expecting our child in 5 months. I couldn't keep living this lie, and frankly, you were too blind to see what was happening right under your nose." He turned on his heel, heading toward the bedroom to retrieve the final bags he had left hidden in the closet. I stood there paralyzed, the divorce papers trembling in my hand. I watched him march toward our private sanctuary, the room where we had made our own promises and whispered our own dreams. He was discarding me like an old piece of furniture. But then, my eyes caught something tucked into the very back of the envelope, something that hadn't been part of the legal documents. It was a Polaroid, a grainy, dark photo taken from a distance. It showed Mark standing in front of a warehouse, handing a duffel bag to a man I recognized from the evening news. The man was a key player in an organized scheme currently under investigation by the federal authorities. My breath hitched. This wasn't just a divorce. This was a setup. As Mark re-emerged from the bedroom, he stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes locking onto the photo in my hand. The mask of calm finally cracked, his face twisting into something terrifyingly predatory. He didn't look like a husband anymore. He looked like a man protecting a lethal secret, and I realized with sudden, chilling clarity that he hadn't come here to end our marriage. He had come here to make sure I disappeared along with it. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a sudden, suffocating electricity. Mark's posture shifted. The controlled, businesslike demeanor evaporated, replaced by a predatory stillness that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. He took a slow, measured step toward me, his eyes darting to the Polaroid clenched in my white-knuckled grip. "Where did you find that?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that didn't sound like the husband I thought I knew. "Is this why you're leaving?" I countered, my voice regaining a sharp, jagged edge of panic-fueled adrenaline. "Is this why you need a clean break? Because you're involved with that group. Mark, that man in the picture, they're being hunted by the Service of Internal Security. You're playing with fire." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he scanned the kitchen, his eyes landing on the butcher's block near the stove. He wasn't looking at me with regret or shame. He was looking at me like an obstacle he needed to neutralize. He was calculating the distance between us, measuring the danger I now posed to his new life, to his unborn child, and to his freedom. "Sarah," he said, his tone softening into a patronizing, sickening sweetness that made my skin crawl. "You were always the smart one. You know that curiosity is a dangerous habit. You were supposed to just sign the papers and walk away with your half of the assets. You were supposed to be the grieving, discarded wife who moved on quietly. But you had to start digging, didn't you?" He took another step, closing the distance. I backed away, my hip hitting the edge of the granite island, the birthday candles still mocking me with their unlit wicks. "I didn't dig for anything, Mark. You left this in the envelope. Was this a test? Or were you just so arrogant that you didn't even check the contents before handing them to me?" "I don't make mistakes, Sarah," he snarled, dropping the act completely. "But you've made a fatal one tonight. You've seen things that aren't meant for eyes like yours. That organized scheme relies on total discretion. If the Service of Internal Security gets a hint of my involvement or your knowledge of it, my life is over. I'm not going to prison for decades, and I'm certainly not going to let a jilted ex-wife pull the thread that unravels everything I've built." My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I realized then that the pregnant mistress and the hasty divorce weren't just a midlife crisis. They were his exit strategy. He needed a clean break from his old identity, from me, to disappear into a new life with Elena, untethered by the ghosts of his past, and I was the only witness to his true colors. I grabbed the heavy glass cake stand, my fingers white against the base. "Don't come any closer," I warned, my voice trembling but firm. Mark chuckled, a dark, humorless sound. He reached into his coat pocket. My breath hitched, expecting to see a weapon, but instead he pulled out a small encrypted burner phone. He tapped a single button, and from the hallway I heard the heavy thud of the front door latching, and then the unmistakable, sickening sound of a deadbolt sliding into place from the outside. "I told you I was moving, Sarah, but I never said I was leaving alone," he said, nodding toward the front door. I heard the muffled sound of heavy footsteps in the hall, men, at least 2 of them, waiting for his signal. "Elena isn't just my mistress. She's the daughter of the man you see in that photo, and her family doesn't like loose ends. I tried to do this the easy way, with legal papers and a simple goodbye, but since you want to play detective, we're going to have to make sure you never get the chance to speak to anyone ever again." He gestured toward the shadows of the living room, and I saw the silhouette of a man stepping through the archway, his hand gripping something heavy hidden inside his jacket. a piece of illegal weaponry that caught the dim light of the kitchen. My blood turned to ice as I realized I was trapped in my own home, with my husband leading the charge to bury me in the wreckage of his crimes. As the man advanced, Mark leaned in close, his face inches from mine, his breath cold against my ear. "Do you hear that, Sarah? That's the sound of your birthday ending permanently." He stepped back, gesturing for his accomplice to finish the job. But as the man raised his hand, the window behind me suddenly shattered into 1,000 jagged diamonds. The sound of the glass shattering was like a thunderclap in the confined kitchen, masking the muffled thud of a heavy object hitting the floor. The accomplice stumbled, distracted by the sudden spray of shards, his weapon slipping from his grip as he instinctively shielded his face. That split second of hesitation was all I needed. I didn't think. I moved. I swung the glass cake stand with every ounce of terror-fueled adrenaline I possessed, slamming the heavy pedestal against Mark's temple. He crumpled like a discarded rag doll, his arrogance vanishing into a dazed, silent slump against the marble island. Without waiting to see if he would rise, I vaulted over the kitchen table and lunged toward the broken window. I knew the neighbors would have heard the glass, but I couldn't rely on luck. I scrambled onto the balcony just as the second man, who had been lurking in the shadows, lunged for my ankle. His fingers grazed my shoe, but I kicked back with my heel, connecting hard with his knee. He howled, and I didn't look back. I sprinted toward the parking garage, my breath coming in jagged, painful gasps. I didn't head for my car. I knew Mark would be monitoring the exit. Instead, I ducked into the service stairwell, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pulled out my phone, my fingers slick with sweat, and dialed the number I had saved for years but prayed I'd never have to use. A contact from my father's old connections within the service of internal security. I didn't say a word about divorce. I simply whispered, "He's at the apartment. He has illegal weapons and he's connected to the syndicate. He's trying to disappear." The next 10 minutes were a blur of motion. I hid behind a fire door watching as Mark, still wobbling and nursing a concussion, stumbled out of the apartment, dragging his associate toward the elevators. He looked frantic, his composure utterly shredded. He reached his car, a sleek luxury sedan, and as he turned the ignition, the parking garage floor suddenly flooded with the harsh, blinding glare of tactical lights. They were waiting for him. The service of internal security descended like shadows, moving with a clinical, terrifying efficiency. There was no shootout. Mark was surrounded before he could even put the car in gear. I watched from the stairwell door as they yanked him out of the vehicle, face first into the concrete. His cries of, "You don't know who you're dealing with," were silenced by the metallic click of handcuffs. Elena, his pregnant mistress, was dragged from the passenger side, her face a mask of shock and entitlement that dissolved into raw, unfiltered terror. As they led them away, one of the agents spotted me. He walked over, his expression unreadable, and handed me a heavy coat. "We've been tracking this organized scheme for months, Miss Miller. Your husband was the weakest link. He thought he could outrun the law, but he only ended up walking straight into our trap." The following weeks were a whirlwind of depositions and dark revelations. The evidence Mark had kept, thinking he was untouchable, became the very thing that buried him. It turned out that his mistress was not just a partner in romance, but a courier for the group, and her pregnancy had been the perfect cover to move packages of prohibited substances across state lines. Mark hadn't been leaving me for love. He had been using me as a clean, tax-paying front for his money laundering activities, and he needed me out of the way before the walls closed in. He was hit with a massive list of charges, including attempt to commit an act involving prohibited weaponry and conspiracy to distribute packages of illegal substances. Because he had cooperated, desperately trying to bargain for a lighter sentence by naming every associate in the network, he was shuffled away into the witness protection system, not as a hero, but as a ghost. He was handed a sentence that meant he would spend the rest of his life in a gray, windowless cell, far from the luxury he had sacrificed his soul to maintain. I sat on the balcony of my new, smaller apartment 3 months later. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the city skyline. I was alone, but for the first time in 10 years, I was entirely free. The divorce had been finalized in a closed courtroom, and every penny of the assets Mark had stolen was being clawed back by the state. I didn't care about the money. I had my life back. I lit a single candle on the small, solitary cupcake in front of me, blew it out, and finally truly began my own version of a birthday. The terror was gone, the secrets were buried, and for the first time in a long time, the only person I had to worry about was myself.